You know, when a house's roof leaks, you generally, well, you patch it.
Right, exactly. You fix it.
Right. And when the paint peels, you repaint it. You kind of operate under this very reasonable assumption that if you just put in the physical work, the structure will eventually shelter you. I mean, it'll become a home.
Right, that's the basic social contract of living somewhere.
Exactly. But what do you do when the very soil the house is built on, like, actively rejects you?
Yeah, that is a terrifying thought.
It really is. Today we're looking at how a crumbling shack, a failed garden, and a simple cup of tea actually become radical weapons of resistance.
We are diving really deep into the psychology of displacement today. We're looking at what happens when the official grand narrative of a nation completely collides with the messy, lived reality of the actual people who are expected to uphold that narrative.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are really thrilled to have you with us today as we explore how literature functions as a tool to reclaim erased histories.
It's such an important topic.
It is, and our guide for this journey is this phenomenal academic article. It's from the 2026 issue of the Confluence Journal of Multidisciplinary Studies.
Such a great piece of research.
Oh yeah, really dense, but so good. It's titled Against the Ingathering, Mizrahi Renaissance and the Politics of Deterritorialization in Ronit Matalon's The Sound of Our Steps.
Quite a mouthful, but we're going to break it all down.
For sure. The authors, Shimei Belarash and Brahim Barhoun, they basically use Matalon's novel to completely deconstruct the fractured landscape of 1960s and 70s Israel. And they do this through the eyes of an Egyptian Jewish family.
Right, which gives us this incredibly intimate, micro-level view of some really massive historical shifts.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can even begin to understand why this specific family is unraveling inside their house, we really have to look at the immense pressure cooker of the society surrounding them, you know?
Absolutely, because to understand the micro, you really have to grasp the macro. The novel is set in an Israeli society that is, at this time, heavily Eurocentric. So institutional and cultural power is basically dominated by the Ashkenazi Jews of European descent.
Okay.
So the state naturally prioritizes and elevates European Jewish history, culture, and aesthetics over everything else.
Right, and officially the state is promoting this foundational Zionist ideology. It's called Mizrahi, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which translates to the ingathering of the exiles. And I mean, it sounds almost utopian on paper. The idea was to basically take immigrants from all over the diaspora and forge them into this new Jew.
Right, this muscular, agricultural, forward-looking citizen.
Exactly, someone who sheds all the perceived weaknesses of their past to build a modern state.
But Belarash and Barhoun analyze how this concept actually functioned in practice, and they use the framework of scholar Ella Shohat to do this.
And we should mention, Shohat presents a deeply critical post-Zionist lens on this era, right?
Yes, and just to be clear for you listening, we're impartially reporting on the academic framework and the themes in the novel here.
Yeah.
We aren't taking a political side, but we really need to understand these perspectives to understand the book.
Exactly. We're just exploring the ideas as they're presented in the source material.
Right. So Shohat argues that the very identity of the Mizrahi, which is this broad term used for Jews of Middle Eastern and North African descent, was actually a constructed category.
Wow.
Yeah, she calls it a Zionist achievement. It was designed to universally categorize diverse Middle Eastern and North African Jews, basically separating their Jewishness from their Arabness.
That is so interesting. So by clumping, say, Iraqi Jews, Moroccan Jews, and Egyptian Jews into one giant monolithic label of Mizrahim, the state effectively erased their distinct individual cultural histories.
Exactly. They were no longer Egyptian or Iraqi. They were just, well, Eastern.
Just Eastern, man. And to help you picture how this assimilation worked, I was thinking about this. Think of Mizrahi not as a melting pot. Like, it's not a pot where you throw in different ingredients to create a rich, complex new flavor.
Right. It doesn't work like that here.
It functioned way more like a filter, like a massive cultural filter designed to intentionally strip away all the spices, the textures, all the languages of the Arab world until all that was left was this uniform, Eurocentric base broth.
What's fascinating here is how Shohat describes the psychological toll of that exact filter.
What does she call it?
She calls it a profound and visceral schizophrenia.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. I mean, these immigrants arrived with a really stubborn self-pride in their ancient cosmopolitan heritage. Like a Jew from Cairo in the 1940s lived in a vibrant intellectual hub.
Right.
Yet, upon arriving in this new state, they are certainly pressured to view the Arab world, which is their own heritage, solely as the enemy. So they're forced by their new country to practice this really severe form of self-rejection.
And you can't suppress an entire demographics culture and expect them to smile and nod forever. That suppression eventually boils over.
Oh, it absolutely boils over. And we see this historically, right, with the Israeli Black Panthers in the 1970s and 80s.
Oh, right. The activists.
Yeah, this was a grassroots movement formed by young Mizrahi and Sephardic activists. They were completely marginalized, living in impoverished transit camps and slums.
And they took their name directly from the American Black Panther movement, didn't they?
They did. They adopted that vocabulary of civil rights and systemic oppression to fight back against this cultural erasure. I mean, they didn't just write polite letters to the government. They took to the streets to highlight these massive economic and social disparities.
Their activism completely shattered that illusion of a unified egalitarian society, and that political friction is exactly what laid the groundwork for the Mizrahi Renaissance.
Which Ronit Matalon is deeply embedded in as an author.
Exactly. So, okay, if the state strips away your identity out in public, where does that pressure go? It doesn't just vanish, it gets bottled up until you get home.
Right, it has to go somewhere.
Which brings us to Matalon's protagonist, Lucette. She's an Egyptian Jewish mother trying to hold her life together in this dilapidated shack provided by the Amidar Housing Company on the outskirts of Petach Tikva.
The physical environment she's placed in is so crucial here.
Yeah.
It's a crumbling structure on the literal margins of society. And because society rejects her authentic self, Lucette tries to exert an absolute, almost tyrannical control over this domestic space.
It's like her only domain.
Yes, she engages in these obsessive, utterly futile attempts to fix the house and maintain appearances.
And you read about her daily routine in the article, and it is just exhausting. She basically splits herself in two.
Yeah, she really does.
Outside the house, she puts on her armor. She hides her Mizrahi maternal persona. She wears proper clothes. She tries desperately to blend in with the Ashkenazi mainstream.
She endures hours of what the novel brilliantly calls not home.
Not home, yeah. But then, the moment she crosses the threshold back into her house, the dam just breaks.
All that suppressed rage detonates.
She bursts through the door screaming. She kicks table legs. She throws heavy pots. She smashes dirty cups in the sink, until her hands actually bleed from the ceramic splinters.
And this isn't just a temper tantrum.
No, not at all.
It's a violent repossession of her territory. She's spent all day conforming to a society that constantly diminishes her, so this explosion is how she claims space.
It's heartbreaking, and I kept reading about her bizarre routine with her shoes. This part really stuck with me.
Oh, the shoes, yes.
She constantly takes her shoes to the local shoemaker, Mustaki. When they're brown, she demands he dye them black. When they're black, she marches back and wants them dyed brown again.
Over and over.
Yeah, and the colors start bleeding through, making this horrible mess on her feet, but she keeps doing it. Sometimes she doesn't even wear them afterward. At first, I thought she was just incredibly vain, or maybe just indecisive, but it feels too frantic, too desperate for that. Is Lucette's obsession with dyeing her shoes just a quirky fashion choice, or is this actually a psychological survival mechanism, a way to clean up one small corner of the world when everything else feels out of her control?
It's absolutely a survival mechanism. Think about what dyeing a shoe requires. You are physically erasing one color and imposing another, trying to force a material to be something it fundamentally isn't.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
For someone who has had their homeland, their language, and their social standing stripped away from them, what academics call a deterritorialized subject, you completely lose control of your macro reality.
You can't control the government.
Right, you can't control the discrimination, so your brain compensates by obsessively trying to control the micro reality. For a deterritorialized subject, the home becomes a site of both constant ruin and desperate repossession. The shoes represent her manic desire to dictate the terms of her existence, even if it's just the color of leather.
She is waging a futile war against the disintegration of her world.
Exactly.
But since physical control of the house fails, the roof still leaks, the walls are still cracking, she has to find a different way to survive. So she turns to something untouchable to preserve her identity, right? Language and domestic ritual.
Yes, and Matalon's writing style perfectly mirrors this psychological state.
That's so.
Well, the novel isn't a neat, chronological, easy-to-digest story. It relies on a disjointed, non-linear stream of consciousness. The prose itself is fragmented.
Oh, reflecting the shattered identity of the character.
Precisely. And the linguistic hybridity is incredible. Matalon weaves Hebrew together with French, English, and most importantly, Egyptian and Palestinian Arabic.
And this is an act of deep rebellion, right? Because Lucette's very identity was confiscated the moment she stepped off the boat.
It really was.
Like her beautiful cosmopolitan name, Lucette, was forcibly Hebraized by the state to Lavana.
Which is such a violation.
It is. For years, she would hear the name Lavana and just look around confused, waiting for someone else to answer.
Stripping someone's name is the ultimate act of assimilation. So Lucette creates a fortress of resistance inside her kitchen.
Yeah.
It's in the quiet sensory details. When she's exhausted, she doesn't turn to the local culture for comfort. She makes Egyptian tea with milk and dunks soggy bread in it.
It's a deeply specific, tactile ritual of softness that she is entirely denied in the outside world.
Exactly. And she also uses the Arabic term yabint, daughter, as this precious heirloom of maternal love. It was passed down from her own mother, Nona.
But language is a weapon, too.
Oh, absolutely.
When she's furious with her husband Maurice, she doesn't curse him in Hebrew. She hurls Arabic insults at him, calling him Al-Thaban, the snake.
And her mother, Nona, takes this refusal to assimilate even further.
Right, Nona refuses to let go of Cairo.
She sits in the house listening constantly to Kol Yisrael's Arabic broadcast. She listens to the Islamic sermons of M. Hamdan and the classic sweeping songs of Kulthum.
She literally tells people that the real Lucette stayed behind in Egypt.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Matalon is showing us that language is functioning as an alternative to geography.
Ooh, say more about that.
Think about it. If the state confiscates your land or places you in an environment that hates you, language becomes a smuggled heirloom. It is a portable homeland you can carry in your mouth.
A portable homeland. That's a powerful way to frame it.
Right. You can't physically take the cafes of Cairo with you to Petach Tikva, but you can take Yabint.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that concept of the portable homeland completely upends the archetype of the wandering Jew.
How so?
Well, Bellerak and Barhoum point out a brilliant irony here. The State of Israel was founded as the ultimate permanent home for the Jewish diaspora. The wandering was supposed to be over.
Right.
Yet within this supposed homeland, Lucette has been made into a wanderer once again. Ironically, she is physically immobilized in a shack, but she is spiritually and culturally exiled.
It's a tragic paradox. And we see this paradox physically manifest when Lucette leaves the safety of her Arabic-speaking kitchen and steps outside into her backyard to interact with the actual physical dirt of Israel.
Because the land itself literally rejects her.
Yes. Let's talk about the garden, Eliana.
Right.
The authors emphasize how this small patch of dirt subverts the core Zionist ethos of making the desert bloom.
Which was the national myth, taking barren land and cultivating it through sheer will and belonging.
Exactly. But Lucette tries to grow roses, and the garden remains a stubborn desert of wilted bushes. She actively hates it. She calls it a penal colony and a forced labor camp.
It just highlights her displacement.
Right. So she hires Mustafa, a Palestinian gardener, to try and fix it. And Mustafa looks at the garden, inspects the dirt, and tells her the soil is good.
There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the earth itself.
The implication is massive. The land responds to Mustafa, its indigenous caretaker, but it refuses to yield for Lucette.
And she ultimately accepts this rejection, telling him in Arabic, Mafish fayeda, there's nothing to be done with it.
It's almost like the garden acts as a lie detector for belonging. The government paperwork says this is her land. The national ideology tells her she has gloriously returned home. But the soil itself is telling a completely different story, isn't it?
It really is. And Matalon uses this relationship between Lucette and Mustafa to dismantle the rigid binaries society tries to enforce.
Right, because there's a lot of paranoia at the time.
Intense, state-sanctioned paranoia about Palestinians. Her neighbors are firing their Arab workers out of fear and suspicion. But Lucette refuses to fire Mustafa.
She actually admires his intellect.
Yes. She looks at a man society expects to be just a manual laborer, and she tells him he should be a Muhammadi, a lawyer. Both the Mizrahi Jew and the Palestinian are marginalized by the exact same hegemonic structure.
So the failure of the garden reveals a shared, unspoken solidarity in their mutual dispossession.
Exactly. And there is this beautifully surreal scene analyzed in the text where Lucette is described as El Mohandis.
The powerful, commanding engineer archetype from classic Egyptian cinema.
Yes. In this sequence, the narrator imagines the flimsy little shack literally lifting off the ground and flying away over the neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
It's a visual admission that rooting in this hostile soil is utterly impossible. If the shack flies away, you no longer have to pretend you belong there.
That is incredible imagery. Now, while Lucette's rebellion is deeply domestic and internal, we see a totally different reaction in her husband, Maurice.
Maurice, yes.
His rebellion is public, it's political, and it is explosive. This cultural fracture basically tears the family apart.
Maurice is such a complex figure. His entire worldview was shaped by the vibrant cafes and bustling streets of Cairo.
That was his education.
Right, that's where he learned about politics, debate, and social justice. He was forced to move to Haifa against his will, and he carries the open wound of that exodus every single day of his life.
And he channels that trauma directly into militancy. He becomes an outspoken activist, forming a political organization called Suba, specifically to fight Ashkenazi discrimination against Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews.
But here is the tragedy of Maurice.
Right.
He sacrifices his own family's financial security and social mobility for this collective cause. He is so consumed by fighting the establishment that he abandons his responsibilities at home.
Matalon makes a very deliberate, politically charged linguistic choice through Maurice here, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. He fiercely insists on using the word immigration to describe their arrival in Israel, outright rejecting the state-sanctioned term aliyah.
Let's break down why that distinction is so taboo. Why does it matter so much what word he uses?
Well, it's the difference between saying you were relocated versus saying you were evicted.
Okay.
One sounds like a neat, positive administrative process. The other acknowledges the violence and trauma. Aliyah literally means ascent. It carries immense biblical weight, framing the journey as a spiritual elevation to a promised land.
It erases the trauma of displacement.
Exactly. Using aliyah smooths over the ugly reality. By insisting on the word immigration, Maurice forces the acknowledgement of being violently uprooted. He refuses to let the state romanticize his exile from Egypt.
And his political convictions eventually push him to a devastating breaking point during a war with Egypt.
It's a really tough scene to read.
It is. Maurice sits in his living room watching the news footage, and he is overcome with intense mourning. But he isn't mourning for the Israeli troops, he is mourning for the defeated Egyptian soldiers.
Right.
He is physically sickened by the Israeli media, humiliating the Egyptian soldiers, showing footage of them running away without their shoes in the desert. He feels deep, agonizing empathy for the neighbors of his childhood.
And this empathy triggers a visceral, explosive fight with his daughter, Connie.
Yeah.
Connie is a child of the new generation. She's trying desperately to assimilate and survive in this new culture.
So she screams at her father.
Yes. She calls him an Arab, a traitor, and demands he get out of the house. It's a brutal moment that exposes the deeply internalized racism and the fractures within the younger Mizrahi generation.
Does Maurice's macro-level empathy for the broader Arab world ironically cause micro-level trauma for his own children, who are just desperately trying to fit into this new Israeli reality?
This raises an important question about the profound cost of resistance. Maurice is fighting for a noble cause, a more inclusive society that acknowledges his history and his humanity.
Right.
But because the society he lives in demands absolute conformity to a rigid binary, showing solidarity with his past makes him an outcast in his new country. And tragically, it makes him an enemy in his own living room.
Wow.
His children feel that their survival depends on conformity, so they simply cannot tolerate his rebellion.
So what does this all mean? As we zoom out from the flying shack and the failed garden, we see that Ronit Matalon's The Sound of Our Steps is doing so much more than just documenting a dysfunctional family. By using fragmented languages, broken homes, and deeply flawed, angry characters, she humanizes the Mizrahi experience. She fiercely rejects the idea that human identity can ever be stuffed into a neat, monolithic box.
She exposes the massive friction between the glossy, grand narratives we are fed from the top down and the messy, painful, lived realities of the marginalized people expected to carry the weight of those narratives.
This is why engaging with texts like this matters to you. The media we consume, the literature we read, the historical vocabulary we accept as default, they shape the boundaries of our reality.
They absolutely do.
Seeking out counter-narratives is essential for building your critical thinking in a world of standardized narratives. It trains you to recognize exactly who is being erased to make a story sound clean and simple.
It forces us to look closely at the crumbling structures in our own societies and ask the hard question, why is the soil so hostile to the people living on it?
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. This story relies entirely on the raw power of generational memory. Nona and Maurice vividly remember the cafes, the debates, and the vibrant life of Cairo. Lucette physically remembers the sharp trauma of leaving it behind.
But generations move on.
Right. What happens to the resistance when the generation that actually remembers the original homeland is gone? If language and memory are the true portable homelands for the displaced, how does a marginalized culture survive when its living memory inevitably fades into history?
It's a haunting thought.
Do the great-grandchildren still whisper "ya bint" in the kitchen? Or does the filter finally strip away the last of the spice? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves and keep asking questions.